Go.
Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Azpertilo. And with me today, I've got John Childress. And we're going to be talking about his book, Culture 4.0, The Future of Corporate Culture. John, where can people find you, not just in Hammersmith?
They can find my website, number one, which is johnrchildress.com. That's very simple. They can find the book on Amazon. They can order it directly from Lid, the publisher. And they can reach me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, excellent. John, thank you so much for coming on. Really love the book. As I was saying before we went live, I've read a lot of leadership books, but it's great to see a book where somebody is writing for today or the future. Because there's been so many transformations, whether it's COVID or AI or social media, lots of things have transformed leadership from maybe the Peters and Waterman's search of excellence. And it's great to put what your view is. What was your inspiration for the book?
Well, that is a really good story. I spoke with one of my retired CEO clients. And he said something profound, Tim. He said, I am so glad I am not a CEO anymore. He says, it feels like they've been strung up on a board and there are 1,000 arrows coming through the air at them and there's nowhere to hide. And what he was referring to is all of the changes that are going on simultaneously. Big changes, AI, working from home, cybersecurity, social media, immigration, increased regulations, diversity in the workplace. I mean, it goes on and on. In my book, I have 20 chapters on the things that are impacting organizations. And it's not how organizations should respond physically. It's how it impacts their culture, which ultimately impacts their ability to perform.
In the book, you argue that culture is no longer just an internal matter, but an interconnected ecosystem tied to external forces like social media and macro demographics. For decades, leaders looked at culture as something contained strictly within their office walls. What is the biggest risk to CEOs who continue to treat culture as an inward-looking silo?
The biggest risk is they miss what all of these external forces are doing to their culture. They're trying to manage it from the inside. So if Gen Z is reacting differently than they think, they're looking at the people as opposed to those causal factors that are in it. So they miss. And the biggest risk is their culture is going to degrade, I call it. It's not going to be fit for purpose. It's not going to be able to support and empower their strategy. And they're going to struggle.
Yeah. So you famously stated that culture isn't a soft HR topic or a slogan on the wall. It is a measurable business system. If a leadership team is currently relying on traditional once-a-year employee engagement surveys to measure their culture, what are they completely missing?
Let me give you an analogy that I use. Suppose you go out in the morning and you've got a flat tire in your car, okay? And you go back in the house and you bring out a tire gauge and you measure how flat it is. And then you say, well, I wonder how flat it is compared to my neighbors. And so you do a measurement around and you get a lot of data about how flat it is.
Yeah.
But you don't know what caused it.
Yeah.
And that's what traditional and current culture assessments and surveys do. They measure what I call the outcome of the culture, how people are feeling, sentiment, emails, trust in management. But they're missing what I think is the most important factor, the causal factors. What's actually causing people to behave, the visible culture. What's causing the visible culture is the invisible culture, which are things like policies that aren't fit for purpose, work practices that create so much hassle people have to work around.
Yeah.
Hiring profiles that bring in the wrong people, peer pressure that nobody really looks at. There's numerous causal factors that if you understand them, you can manage them, you can reshape them, you can change. A lot of policies were established when the company began.
Yeah.
Well, the world is different.
Yeah.
So I think leaders have to have the courage to look at those causal factors and be willing to reshape them.
We've had a comment from John Ferrara, which is that culture is everything and it spreads across the whole consistency. A gold mine are included our internal teams, customers, resellers, editors, analysts, etc. It was that family that built the business and created an experience that still lives in all of us and one of the best experiences of our lives.
I totally agree. Nice comment.
Yeah, thanks, John. In Culture 4.0, your book, you drive deep into the disruptive power of AI, robotics, and cybersecurity. Many executives view AI purely as a productivity or tech stack upgrade. How does introducing AI actually rewire the human nervous system and behavior culture of a company?
You know, there's a lot of conversations in the world now about AI. Most of them are polarized. It's either going to be a boom for productivity and effectiveness, or it's going to cause massive layoffs.
Yeah.
You know, both things are happening. We don't know what the future of AI is, but the fact is it's here. So I think people are asking the wrong questions. They shouldn't be asking, is it going to be a positive or a negative? They should be asking, what kind of a corporate culture do we need in order to make AI effective and to be beneficial for both our business, our employees, and our clients? To me, that's the real question.
I was one of the things that fascinates me is your the work you did at 3 Mile Island.
That's ancient history, Tim.
Yeah. Early in your career, you advised the leadership team at 3 Mile Island following the 1979 nuclear accident, which heavily shaped your view of culture under pressure. When a business experiences a massive operational or ethical failure today, like the banking fraud at Wells Fargo or the emission scandal at Volkswagen, how much can that be traced back to treating culture as a footnote rather than a system risk?
Well, it's definitely a system risk. Excuse me. At 3 Mile Island, what we discovered was that while it was one pump that failed, that's the technical part. If you do a root cause and you go back for the causal factors, it was a culture of technical arrogance, a culture of silos. In other words, departments that acted like kingdoms or fiefdoms and didn't communicate well back and forth. And so the messages did not get passed on. And as a result, you had an accident. And so there's a lot of Volkswagen is the same thing. They wanted to be number one in car services so bad that they fudged it. That's not a technical issue. That's a cultural leadership issue.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on. So the easiest thing to do is go for attribution. Who's at fault? Rather than looking at what in the culture and who in the culture is driving this.
One of your core keynote topics is that human behavior is the primary attack surface for cybercrime, making cybersecurity a cultural issue rather than just an IT issue. How can a leader build a security culture without creating an atmosphere of fear and micromanagement?
Well, I think the first thing that leaders need to understand is that your corporate culture is the hacker's playbook. They look at your corporate culture in and out. They look at who says what, who's in charge of who, etc. It is easier to influence an individual to click on the wrong link than it is to hack into a system. And so we need to look at the people factors. We need to create an organization where anything that looks out of the ordinary is okay to talk about. And one of the reasons it's not in most organizations is that most leaders hide the number of attacks that they actually get. They don't talk about it to their employees. They rarely talk about it to the public unless it's been made known for some reason.
Yeah.
So there's not an openness to discuss these things. And if there's an openness to discuss, someone will say, well, wait a minute, I just got an email from my CFO, but she's on vacation. That brings up a red flag. That should be easy to talk about.
We all heard Peter Drucker's famous quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." But your work challenges this popular myth, suggesting that we have to work in tandem. How do strategy and culture actually break down or drift apart during execution? And how do leaders stop that drift?
Yeah, I think the phrase I use in my book is strategy and culture sit down for breakfast together, work out a plan, and then go to work.
Yeah.
Because you can have a very solid strategy and a weak culture, and it's not going to be able to be executed. On the other hand, you can have a weak strategy at the moment and a strong culture, and that's going to evolve because people are going to speak up and they're going to be a part of creating something that they know is going to work. They drift apart because most strategies are developed in isolation of, can our culture really execute?
Yeah. Middle managers have spent the last few years incredibly burned out, caught between executive demands and frontline realities, especially in hybrid setups. Your book highlights them as cultural architects. What specific tools or decision rules do middle managers need to successfully anchor culture 4.0?
Well, I think the first thing is to realize that with working from home, distributed workforces, outsourcing, et cetera, managers are going to need to shift from activity-based management to outcome-based management. In other words, it's not, is this person working so many hours on the right topics, but are we getting the output that we need to move the business forward? The second tool that I think they should be trained on is systems thinking. Looking at an organization, looking at an issue, looking at a problem from a systemic point of view, rather than just focusing on the first cause of that problem. They should also be developers of people rather than managers of people. People come into a job and, yeah, they want to perform well, but they also want to grow in their knowledge, capabilities, stature, position, income. It's not HR's job to grow them. It's the manager's job to grow their people.
I think there's been a whole change, isn't there, in the workplace about why people come to work. And because what used to happen was that people came to work to get a salary. And now people come to work because they want to maybe change the world.
Or they want to have the kind of a life that their parents didn't have, which is working 20.
Yes.
That their parents did have.
Yeah.
They want more balance in life. They want more say. They want to be a part rather than a cog.
Yeah.
And so I think you're absolutely right. There is a big change in that. Through my research, I found that even senior executives are willing not to take a job if they can't have the kind of flexibility that they need.
Yeah. And people will take less money to get that purpose and that flexibility.
Not too much less.
No, but
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Many CEOs are still trying to mandate a five-day return to office, especially stating that hybrid worker destroys culture. Is hybrid work actually destroying corporate culture, or is it just destroying the old way of managing it?
It's certainly not destroying a culture, but it is altering it. Okay. And I think we need to bring in the principle of horses for courses here. There are some jobs and there are some people who are highly productive offsite, whether they're home or wherever they are. There are certain jobs that you need to be there. And so I think organizations need to have policies that have the flexibility to understand that. The most insidious thing that happens about those who work from home is that there's a possibility of developing a two-tier culture.
Right.
Okay. The in crowd and the out crowd, the people who are most likely to be promoted because they're in constant FaceTime with the boss.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen. And there are lots of organizations that recognize that and have shifted the way they do things. For example, in my book, I talk about one organization that they have meetings and they invite the people working from home into the meetings, but everybody uses Zoom, not just the people locally in the meetings.
Right.
So that there's no hidden glances or any of that sort of thing that creates a two-tier culture.
Yeah.
And there's lots of stories that I come into my book about how you adapt to those kind of things. Because look, the fact is, working from home is here.
Yeah.
It's not going back in the bag.
I know my partner's youngest, who's now 31, through his 20s, he wanted to be in the office because he wanted the social ability. He lives and works in London,
Sure.
and he wants the ability to be able to go out and go for a couple of beers with people.
Yeah. The big misconception from remote working is that it impairs innovation. And there's a lot of studies now that show that that's not true, because one of the reasons is you need two things in innovation. One, you need that people together time so they spark ideas.
Yep.
But at the same time, you need quiet, reflective time to where a person is not hassled by phones and constant meetings and people interrupting. It's where those sparks get developed into products. And then they come back into the workforce and they get further developed with that kind of a cadence. And I think the organizations that realize that have used it very effectively to make innovation strides.
We've had a comment from Robert Turl, and he says, is the A-lister mentality rather than the A-team mentality being found wanting as defined by the likes of McKinsey and similar?
I didn't quite get that. I'm sorry.
I didn't quite get it either. Is the A-lister mentality rather than the A-team mentality being found wanting as defined by the likes of McKinsey and similar?
I guess I'll have to pass on that. I don't
Okay, I wasn't sure. I thought I'd ask it because I wasn't sure about it myself.
It's
So
an A-lister mentality rather than
the A-lister mentality rather than the A-team mentality.
Now I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, the fallacy is that there are stars that move the organization along, whether it's the star CEO or the star engineer or whatever. It's really the team and the culture that moves things along. The star may come up with an idea. The star may come up with an insight. But no person creates it alone. No person drives the motivation by themselves. So it is that team that, and I call the team the enlarged team, which I will call the culture. Okay. It is the culture that executes and delivers. Every piece is important. The new ideas are important, but one person cannot deliver them by themselves.
Thanks, Robert, for that.
Thank you, Robert.
Yep, you have a brilliant phrase. Organizations are shadows of their leaders, and that's the good news and the bad news. If a CEO suspects their corporate culture is toxic or failing to execute, what is the first, perhaps uncomfortable question they need to ask themselves in the mirror?
The first thing is, let's unpack that phrase because it is accurate, but people have focused too much on the CEO instead of the leaders,
Yeah.
which includes the board. The board makes a lot of decisions or not. The senior management team and that next level. So it really is the leadership that has an impact, casts a shadow, not just the leader. Okay. Secondly, if I were a leader and I was suddenly realized that I've got a toxic culture and it's not supporting my strategy, the first thing I do is I sit down and I talk to people. And I'd say, what is it about our organizational culture, our systems, our policies, our procedures? What is it that gets in the way? And I think good leadership means you have two ears and one mouth and you use them in that proportion.
Yep.
So I think that's the first thing I would do is gather up the information. And then I would look at which of those negative causal factors has the most impact. Okay. They all have some sort of an impact, but if you can scale them, you'll realize that you can't do everything. You can't change everything. And one part about corporate culture is if you change one meaningful thing and it has a positive impact, lots of other things in the culture automatically change as well. For example, at 3 Mile Island, we changed how they communicated in their meetings. Okay? We got more openness, more honesty, more transference of information. Lo and behold, safety improved, trust improved, teamwork improved, productivity improved. We didn't go after that. They're byproducts of reshaping the culture. So I think you've got to look at what are those one or two things and then really have the courage to make those changes.
So last question. If a leader finishes reading Culture 4.0 and realizes their current organizational model is entirely fit for the future, what is the single most impactful action they should take on Monday morning to begin shifting the system?
Well, if I were really cheeky, I'd say, call me up.
Yes.
Again, I think it's the same answer I gave just before. Really don't do attribution. Don't look for the problem people. Look for the problem in the culture. Look for the causal factors. And they'd be surprised at how simple they are, how non-obvious they are. Some of them could be like peer pressure. Nobody measures peer pressure. Nobody looks at it, but it is a huge impact on your culture. Hiring policies, work policies, processes, etc. Things that cause people to do things that get in the way of performance.
I said it was going to be the last question, but actually Robert has asked an interesting question, which I'm going to read out because I think it's.
Let me get my glasses so I can.
Which is, should the board culture reflect the company culture? They may only meet 9 times a year, and most are either NEDs or investors, or other than the CEO and CFO.
Well, there are two answers there. Number one is they should definitely understand the culture we're trying to create. And when they make board decisions, make them with that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two, there is such a thing as a board culture. And many of them, to be very honest, are ineffective. So spending time developing the kind of culture among the board that's going to give the CEO and the company the kind of leadership it needs has often been neglected. And I think it's a big part of modern board practices. Let's make sure we have a board culture that works and not just a strategy that works.
John, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your new book, Culture 4.0, The Future of Corporate Culture. John, if I wanted to get a copy of this, where can I get one from?
Amazon.co.uk.
Excellent. And John, where can we find more information about you?
On my website, I've got all six of my business books.
Yep.
Plus a book on fly fishing, in case anybody's interested. And the website is www.johnrchildress.com.
John, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book. Excellent book. I really enjoyed it. And I'd certainly highly recommend it. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about it.
Tim, it's been a pleasure. And let's do this again on my next